Dear colleague, welcome to this webinar. For those who do not know me, I am Louis-Philippe Boulet, respirologist in Quebec City, Canada. I'm the past president of Interasma, and I am delighted today to introduce Professor Ignacio Ansotegui for this last Interasma webinar of the 2022-2023 series. Professor Ansotegui is the Executive Medical Director of the World Allergy Organization. He's head of the Department of Allergy and Immunology at the Hospital Quirónsalud Biscay in Bilbao, Spain. And today we'll speak about the global burden of asthma now and a look at the future. We all know that asthma is one of the most common diseases worldwide, and the improved knowledge of this disease, as well as advances in its management, can reduce its consequences. So in this conference, Professor Ansotegui will inform us about the prevalence and incidence of asthma in the various regions of the world, its burden, mortality, morbidity, and how this evolved over the last decade. So we will certainly hear about the role of allergens and other environmental triggers, such as pollutants, and look at the consequences of global warming on airways and asthma. Of course, recently, many regions of the world have suffered extreme climatic events, and this will likely play a major role in the future of respiratory health. So it will be very interesting to hear what Professor Ansotegui has to say about that. So this talk is, however, a recording, as Professor Ansotegui could not be with us live today. Thank you for attending, and without any further ado, here is Professor Ansotegui's talk.
Good day. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you in this Interasma webinar to talk about the global burden of asthma now and look at the future. My name is Ignacio Ansotegui, and this is my disclosure of interest. Okay, and we will start just with this campaign from the European Respiratory Society about the burden of asthma, because it's one of the most common chronic diseases in Europe. In fact, 10 million of people under 45 years of age have asthma in Europe. 10% of the adult patients with asthma have severe asthma, and the direct cost of asthma per year in Europe is 20 billion euros. Also, we know that the asthma begins much earlier in life than other chronic disease. So we know that we have a high lifetime burden. In Europe, 67,000 child asthma cases per year could be prevented by meeting the WHO air quality limit values. And also we know that the lack of appropriate treatment can lead to death. Okay, regarding the global burden of disease that estimates the incidence, prevalence, mortality, years of life lost, years life with a disability, and disability adjusted life years due to 369 disease and injuries for 2 sexes and for 4 countries and territories. Regarding asthma, we know that the death rates were highest in countries of low and middle socio-demographic index, while prevalence was highest in high socio-demographic index countries. Actually, asthma was responsible for 20.6 million dailies in 2019. How is the incidence rate of asthma? Well, globally, the incidence of asthma was increasing 50% from 3,697 to 3,216 that it was in the 90s. So we know that the incidence of asthma was slightly higher also in males than in females. But however, if we just check the age standardized incidence rate, we can see that decrease globally, and it has an estimated annual percentage change of minus 0.47. When we just check these trends of age standardized incidence rate globally and among the different regions according to the socio-demographic index, we can see that all 5 regions saw downward trends, but the high socio-demographic in this region maintains the highest level. And when we talk about absolute number cases of asthma, we can see that the highest number of asthma in 2019 was India with 453, followed by USA 414, China 376, and Brazil 162. So they are ciphers that are really impacting due to the quantity of people affected. But when we just talk about the age standardized incidence rate, we also can see that USA actually is having the highest age standardized incidence rate and affects 1,547 per 100,000 persons. So actually, the highest sociodemographic index is also having the province of highest incidence rate. In fact, when we just check how has been the change in the past 30 years, Japan was a decrement, so it was a decrease, a change of minus 2.5. Meanwhile, USA had an increase of 1.20. So, and what happens with the mortality of asthma? Globally, the number of deaths slightly increased during the past 30 years, but the age standardized incidence rate really was diminished, was decreased. When we just check in the different regions, we can see that more than half of the total asthma death causes occur in the low, middle, and middle sociodemographic index regions. Meanwhile, the low, middle sociodemographic in the region had the most deaths in the 19. When we just check the trends of the mortality, the trends of the age standardized death rate, we can see also that all 5 regions exhibit a downward trend, and the higher SDI region, so with the most obvious decline. So the change was minus 5.35. And when we just talk about the disability adjusted life years, the dailies, we could say that at the global level, all the numbers decrease and the age standardized daily rate decrease. So we could say that it was a negative change. So it was the estimated annual percentage change was minus 2.05. And in total, if we just consider all 30 years, it was a decrease of 42.5%. So how was then the change in the different regions? Only the low sociodemographic and the low middle regions increased the dailies from 90 to 2019. And what is also the trend? We also can see that all decreases and were most serious in the high middle SDA regions. So with the change of minus 2.52. And when we just look at the different ciphers, all combined incident, deaths, and dailies, well, we can say that the incident affects overall to the youngest population, and meanwhile, the deaths is just to the oldest of population. But it's also very important to show that there is a small increment in the children after 5 years old. And when we just talk about the dailies, of course, it's also very important how it's affecting and not only the children, but also the population that is taking care of the children, just regarding the activities. So when we just talk about the risk factors, how has been changed in these 30 years, we can see that regarding the deaths and the dailies, the smoking is decreasing, but we have an increment of the body mass index in the population. Meanwhile, the occupational asthmatians are not so important regarding the deaths or the dailies. Well, what we know is that the allergic respiratory disease are increasing all over the world, and the asthma is a common chronic respiratory disease, as we already seen, affecting from different studies from 1 to 18% of the population in the different countries. The rhinitis is also ranging from 1 up to 63% in some other countries. But if we just check the overall, we could say that unspecified rhinitis was around 30%, the allergic rhinitis around 18%, and the non-allergic rhinitis around 12%. So what is clear is that the asthma is affecting more than 260 million in the world, and allergic rhinitis is even 3 times more, or almost 3 times more, affecting more than 600 millions in the world. What we know is that the prevalence of the allergic disease continued to rise in the 21st century and represents the most frequent chronic disease in Europe, affecting, with the most conservative estimations, more than 150 million people. And most of the people, 30%, suffer from allergic rhinitis and allergic rhinoconjunctivitis, 20% from asthma, and 50% from other allergic conditions like the skin conditions. But what we know is also that due to these diseases, we have an increment of the use of the health services, hospitalization, pharmaceutical costs, billions of days of lost productivity through absenteeism or presenteeism. So the people that goes to work but are unable to perform well. So it is estimated that the annual cost of asthma in Europe is over 18 billion. We already seen in another data from the US 20 billion. And the allergic rhinitis might cost several times more, up to 100 billion, according with the data published by Engalen investigators. What we know is that this disease affects the personal development, the career plans, the life choice, affects the sleep, the mood, the school and work competence, the social interaction. And also we know that the allergic individuals suffering this disease have a higher risk of developing depression. So we could say that the impact of allergies on quality of life and respiratory allergies on the quality of life can be as high or even higher than that disease commonly perceived as being more serious. What makes us to be allergic? Well, what we know is that to be allergic, we must have a genetic makeup that predisposes us to suffer allergy, but also we have to be exposed to the adequate environmental stimuli that will just make this combination to develop a specific allergy. What is clear is that the change takes time to change, but the environment has changed dramatically in the last century. So we were before rural people, and now we are most of the countries urbanized, and also where style of life has changed. So as we say, before the 19th century, we were rural, the occupational practice was farming and agriculture, mostly outdoor activities, poor hygiene, close contact with the stock, farm products, high rate of parasitic and bacterial infections, poor insulated and heated houses, weather influenced indoor conditions. Nowadays, we are urbanized with occupational practice are more industry, manufacturing, technology. We have a lot of indoor hobbies, mostly indoor activities, high level of hygiene, low rate of parasitic and bacterial infections. Our houses are better insulated and heated. We have a constant indoor conditions, but overall, what we are is living with much more outdoor and indoor pollution and stress. When we just try to analyze how is the immune response to become sensitized, well, before in all these kind of slides of trying to explain how the sensitization occurs, we know that before it was only the presence of the allergens, but nowadays, of course, the allergens comes to the epithelia. They are in contact with the antigen-presenting cells that, according with the pattern of cytokines, will just induce Th2 profile, and those will induce the switch from the IgM to produce IgE. IgE that is specific to the allergen that was entering at the beginning of the reaction. And this specific IgE is bound to the cell surface of mast cells and basophils. And then is when we say that a patient or a person is a subject, is sensitized. But now it's not only the allergens who play a role, also other the pollutants, the environmental factors. We know that interfere also with epithelia and release some cytokines and release the alarmins. And those actually what they do is enhance the antigen presentation and also enhance all the process of the allergy sensitization. So we have a combination that is the allergen with other factors, just enhance the sensitization. Of course, afterward, when the patient is sensitized with the second contact with the allergen, there is a cross reactivity of the Ig molecules that induce the release of mediators. And these mediators are responsible of the immediate response and releasing histamine, TNF-alpha, proteases, heparin, and those will be responsible of the sneezing, the nasal congestion, nasal anacular pruritus, and the watery nose. After a few minutes, also they are released lipid mediators, the effect of the prostaglandins, also the PAF and the leukotrienes, and those will induce the wheezing and the bronchoconstriction. After hours, we have also the release of cytokines and chemokines that will induce the mucosecretion and the call to the place of inflammation of the eosinophils, so we call the eosinophil recruitment. And then this will continue with a chronic phase that we have also the effect of all these cells and all these cytokines that will activate the memory T cells and actually will release more factors that activate the effector cells. Increment of adhesiveness and vascular permeability will induce eosinophil infiltration, local Ig production, bronchial smooth muscle contraction, and mucus secretion. So those are responsible of the bronchial repair hyperreactivity, and also at the end, with the chronic effect, the bronchial remodeling, responsible of the persistence of the symptoms, and also it will help to have more exacerbations. But in this immune system, for many years, the innate immune system was almost ignored. I mean, it was only one page in the old immunology books, and what we knew is that the innate also start to help the adaptive immune system. But which is the role of innate immunity? Well, you can see here this slide where we have the awardees of the 2011 Nobel Prize because Bruce Gothard and Jus Hoffman were talking about the activation of the innate immunity. Meanwhile, Rolf Steinman was talking about investigating about the dendritic cells and the role in adaptive immunity. So we have cells of the innate lymphoid system like the ILC1, ILC2, ILC3, and if we just take, for instance, how they are, we can see that the ILC1 is very similar to the Th1, the ILC2 very similar to the Th2, the ILC3 to the Th17, and then K to the CD8, cytotoxic CD8. So we can see that there is also a lot of cells that participates in an organized manner also in the innate immune system. The fact is that we already mentioned on the epithelia, we also have the effects not only of the aeroallergens, but also the pathogens and air pollutants. And all of these will release these molecules that we mentioned before, IL-33, TSLP, IL-25, what we call alarmins. And these alarmins actually activate the ILC2, the lymphoid cells too, and that will be an increment of the T2 response. And that's why these days we talk more about T2 without TH. I mean, we just say, because it's the combination of the ILC2 plus the TH2. So in other words, in this slide, we can see how is one activation really regarding the ILC2 and the activation through the allergen in the Th2, but at the end, what we have is an eosinophil activation. So we could say that the pollutants plus the allergen increase the sensitization. So it's a very bad combination, pollution with allergens, because of course in those patients that are substitutively, they are just prone to develop allergy, the co-exposure to air pollutants and allergens will decrease the epithelial and skin barrier function and will increase factors of oxidative stress, epigenetic changes, Th2, Th17 response, and at the end we will have an increment on sensitization, including the asthma and the allergic rhinitis. So we could say that we have the presence of the allergen that is permanent, and we have a genetic predisposition. It will come the allergic sensitization, the organ hyperresponsiveness, and the disease. But we have some factors that increase this cascade, that is enhancing factors like the pollution, the cigarette, the smoke, And also they could be the same just for being as a triggers once the patient is sensitized. But also we have removed some protective factors that they were just changing the way of the immune system is activated. So, but when we talk about the pollution, it's very important that we have the pollutants not only outside but also inside. Regarding the general pollutants, we have primary pollutants like carbon monoxide, nitric oxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, ammonia, particulates, volatile organic compounds, and the secondary pollutants, that is a combination of the primary pollutants with effect of some physical factors like the sun, and we will have just the sulfur trioxide, the nitric acid, the sulfuric acid, the ozone, the ammonia, also material particulates maybe also secondary, not only from the primary. So, and we use six of them just to control or just to compare the different countries. And we have some of them that they are primary, like the nitrogen dioxide, also the sulfur dioxide, the carbon monoxide, the lead, particulate matter, the PM10 and PM2.5, and secondary, that they are also the particulate matter and the ozone. What we know is that the oxides of nitrogen increase the risk of lower respiratory illness, and also increase the risk of both bacterial and viral experimental infections in animals. But several studies have shown an enhanced bronchoconstrictor response to allergens. Sulfur dioxide also can induce acute bronchospasms in asthmatic children, even at very low concentration and even in short exposure duration. And several studies have demonstrated that this is a decrement in the forced vital capacity. We know also that the people with asthma are not protected from exacerbations caused by brief exposure to the sulfur dioxide. And the ozone, we know that it's good up high, but bad nearby. And well, this is a chemical reaction that is the addition of the volatile organic compounds with the nitric oxides and the effect of the sunlight, and we create this ground level ozone. And actually, this is a problem because the ozone at the ground level increase respiratory symptoms and decrease the lung function. And also, we know that there's an increment in the symptom of medication use and decreased peak flow in association with this exposure to ozone. And multiple studies have documented an increase of the ER visits when there is a high ozone levels at that days. Well, in the WHO, actually, it's very common to use the concentration of five particulate matter just to check how is the difference among the different countries. And this is very important because the particulate matter are also quite important. The fine particles, when we have less than 2.5 microns, are composed of dust, soot, smoke, and liquid droplets. And here you have a representation of the fine particle compared with the cross-section of a human hair. And in this case, it's very important the size because coarse particles that they are bigger than 2.5 micrometers are deposited in the upper respiratory tract and large airways. Meanwhile, those that are smaller than 2.5 microns may reach terminal bronchioles and alveoli. And of course, we have some also ultrafine particles that they are the most dangerous ones because they are smaller than zero point 0.1 micron and they are in variable chemical composition. But and although these particles represent less than 1% of the particulate mass, it's suspected that is causing the greatest harm due to the size that can just enter deeper into the bronchial tree and alveoli. So the particulate matter, we know that increased respiratory symptoms and increased hospitalizations, but also decrease the spirometric values and the peak flow. So we can just summarize that the acute effects of the pollutants are increment of respiratory symptoms, increased lower respiratory illness, increment of asthma exacerbation. There is a decrement in the reversible lung function. There is, of course, induction of airway inflammation. There is an altered host defense and an enhanced allergy response. At the chronic level, we know that there is a decrement in the lung growth and altered lung structural development. So it's this effect that we know as bronchialization. And also we have an increment lifetime risk for asthma, of chronic obstructive disease, and lung cancer. So it is true that now with the new rules, we can just more or less control what the industry is just releasing to the atmosphere. But even that will not compensate the quantity of gross domestic products we have, and also the number of vehicle miles traveled, not including not only the cars or trucks, but also even planes and big boats. Because we know that the traffic several studies have shown the increment of the respiratory symptoms and increment of the asthma prevalence in relation with the traffic exposure. In this respect, I like very much this study that was carried out in Lima, Peru, that is actually with a very, very congested traffic. So they took two big avenues, that it was Abancay, Guillermo de la Fuente, and Cesar Vallejo. They just were measuring for 2 years the levels of PM 2.5, PM10, SO2, and NO2. After that, for another 2 years, they left two of the avenues open, Guillermo de la Fuente and Cesar Vallejo, but they closed Abancay Avenue. And then they measure again how was the pollution. Well, the fact is, in that avenue that was close to the traffic, it was a reduction of the PM 2.5, 62%, of the PM10, 55%, of the oxides of the nitrogen, 65%, and the SO2, 82%. So the conclusion is that the traffic regulation is really very important because can contribute to the continuous reduction of the different air pollutants. So, and this is the way that we can improve also the air quality in our cities. It's not the same to breathe an allergen that is completely clean, like we have in the left side, that when we have the pollen plus all this pollution together, that is much more harmful. Another problem is that many times we think that the pollution is only outside, but probably sometimes indoor air pollution could be even higher. We have possible pollutants in the bedrooms, in the attic, in the garage, in the kitchen, in the yard, in all the areas, and includes all kind of products. So we note that in this review is that the indoor air pollution might be much higher than outdoor pollution, and it includes gases, particulates, toxins, microorganisms, and that induce damage through oxidative stress, gene activation, epigenetic changes, cellular and immunological system activation. And we also know that the children are significantly affected by the impact of the environment, and also because there is the poor air quality has been related to an increment in the prevalence of clinical manifestations of asthma and rhinitis. So it is a major risk factor and contributor to morbidity and mortality from this major chronic disease. So another problem is the global warming and warming and the greenhouse effect due to the change in the chemical composition of the atmosphere, the rays that has to rebound into the earth and leave again the atmosphere are trapped into the atmosphere, changing and increasing the temperature. So we have the solar energy influx, the chemistry of the atmosphere, but also the albedo, that is the ability of the Earth's surface to reflect the light. What we know is that we are increasing in the last years and decades the quantity of CO2 and also the temperature, not only because we do direct pollution, but also because we are destroying the forests, that they are the lands that may decrease also these levels of CO2. The fact is that due to human activities, we know that we have an increment of the CO2 and the temperature that will be translating to increased amount of pollen, stronger allergenicity of the pollen, increased elimination rate, altered plant tree distribution, early start to pollen season, and longer pollen season. So in this slide, you can see here how in the center of the city, we have the highest levels of temperature and CO2. And this is very important because in this study conducted by CISCA, we can see the difference between urban and rural sites of the same city, where there is slightly less than 2 degrees of difference in temperature and only 1/5 more of CO2. But at the end, in the center of the city, we have 5 times more pollen. And also we have more pollution. So that's why inside the cities could be even an area with much higher possibility to have symptoms. So what we know is that due to the season of pollen and fungal spores, we have higher counts of tree, grasses, weeds, and even fungal spores. And all of those are contributing to increment of the allergic disease. And even in Finland, where 1 degree was so important, this warming is, we know that the birch is one of the most, or the most important allergen source in the Northern Europe. And we know that at the beginning, the birch was only in the very south of Finland, but nowadays it's occupying half of Finland, the birch effect of the pollen. But also we have different changes with all these, let's call crazy weather that we are having with a lot of storms, a lot of dryness. And this is really important because also these storms are very important because we know that the high concentration of allergenic particles produced an outflow of colder air send the pollen grains and particles and then allows just to be inhaled by our patients. And this happens, but not only that. Also, we have before the storm that some of these pollens are broken due to an osmotic shock, and these create some microparticles from the pollen that are really, really aggressive. And so we know the intact pollen is activated, releasing, and the thunderstorm that will really create, after the rupture of this pollen, these puffs of chronic fragments carrying allergens and are really able to induce very, very severe and fast symptoms. In fact, there is a take-home message. Subjects affected by pollen allergy should be alert to the danger of being outdoors during thunderstorms in the pollen season. Well, another important factor in the different parts of the world is just some other meteorological conditions like the sandstorms. Sandstorms that really they contains a lot of particles, and in this case, we know that they remains for longer time in the atmosphere. The fact is that a lot of patients have to go to the hospital, and all of them at the same time because these sandstorms are occurring in a very rapid manner and collapse many of the health systems. So what we can do regarding this? Well, we need to provide information about risk factors, identify the sources of the pollution. We need to investigate, publish, disseminate the knowledge, prescribe solutions, educate the families and communities. We need to sit down with the patient and try to analyze if those factors are specifically affecting, and that will not only just prescribe the medication, but also to try to analyze other factors. We need also to train other people, advise solutions for political representatives and leaders, support better standards and policies to reduce harmful exposure, advocate for monitoring, and emphasize the need to protect the vulnerable people. But still, we have a lot of unmet needs that we need to understand. What are the independent and joint effects of the specific pollutants? Who are the susceptible subjects? What are the mechanisms? What are the mechanisms by which our pollutants enhance the allergic response? There are still some questions on some work to be done. So we can summarize our talk that from the 90 to these 30 years to the 2019 has been observed a decrement in the ACE standardized death rates related to asthma and a reduction in the global disability adjusted life years attributed to asthma. There are significant differences among the five regions according to the socio-demographic index. And we also know that the prevalence of respiratory allergic disease is increasing, and climate change and pollution are major contributors to the increment of respiratory allergic diseases. And with this, I would like to thank all of you for your attention. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Professor Ansotegui for this most interesting talk. As I said previously, unfortunately, Professor Ansotegui could not be with us in person today. So in regard to the question period, we invite you to send your questions to Interasma using the form next to the streaming site on of the conference on the Interasma site, www.interasma.org. So thank you for attending this conference. And of course, we invite you to listen to these monthly webinars. I think you'll find those extremely interesting, and we will have many of the leaders in the world in the field of asthma and related disease to talk to you about some hot topics. You can check the agenda on the Interasma website. And I then wish you a nice day or evening, and see you at the next conference. Thank you.